Today's episode is sponsored by Configit, the global leader in configuration lifecycle management. Visit them at configit.com.
Aerospace and defense manufacturing.
Machines and automation.
Additive manufacturing.
Smart manufacturing.
Global manufacturing economy.
Welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals, powered by SME. From the design screen to the shop floor to final assembly, we drive the conversation about making manufacturing smarter by connecting people who are passionate about manufacturing.
Hello and welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Now, the podcast for manufacturing professionals. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get new episodes delivered to your feed each week. I'm David Muller, Senior Editor at SME Media, and I'll be your host today. We're joined by Daniel Joseph Berry, Vice President of Product Marketing at Configit. Daniel has been in the technical space for more than 30 years with roles spanning hardware and software development, sales, product management, product marketing, and strategy. This breadth of experience has helped give Daniel a holistic understanding of the entire product delivery value chain. Thanks for joining us, Daniel. We're glad to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be on.
Hey, could we start by getting a little bit more background and information on you and Configit? What should we know about you professionally, personally, or whatever you kind of want to share about yourself?
Well, I'll give you a heads up. I don't think it would take long for people to work out that I'm Irish, but I have lived in Denmark for over 33 years at this point. So the company that I work for, Configit, is based headquartered in Denmark, which is, by the way, a great country to live in.
But good things.
Yeah, and surprisingly, maybe a lot of people don't know this, but there is a thriving IT software community here in Copenhagen. Lots of great companies have come out of here, and Configit's been around since 2000, and they've been very focused on one specific problem that a lot of manufacturers that deliver customizable products have, or if you like, configurable products, and that is how to ensure a good product configuration process without any errors and delays or good performance and stuff like that. So if you want to kind of understand what we do, I mean, I think everybody has used a configurator at some point or another where you're configuring a car or something like that. You're choosing the color, you're choosing the wheels, what have you. And basically, a car can be quite a complicated piece of equipment. You can have like 100,000 different features that you have to choose on that. And when you have that many features, the number of combinations of those features can be in the millions or even trillions for that matter. So I think for one of the car companies we work with, we worked out that the number of configurations that were possible for that car was something like 5.8 by 10 to the power of 21.
Oh, man. Sounds astronomical.
So a lot of people try to manage this using Excel sheets and stuff like that, and I think you figure out fairly quickly that's not going to work. A lot of people also use things like configure price quote systems. They're used a lot in sales configuration. But when you're a manufacturer working with these kind of products, you're not just doing configuration at the point of sale. You're also doing it in engineering. You're doing it in manufacturing. You're doing it in service. So you end up with a lot of these configuration jobs being done all over the company. And really what Configit is the expert at doing is kind of bringing all those different configurations together, or all those activities about configuration, bringing all that together, consolidating that into one shared product model with all the features and rules and everything inside there. That thing can be accessed by everybody. So it's about really getting all of that disparate data that you have across the company on product configuration, the rules, the options, all of these things, bring it into one place and then manage it from there and make it consumable easily by anybody in there. So if you want to make a sales configurator, that's great. You can use it for that. If you want to make an engineering configurator or deploying, a product into the field or doing service configuration, you can use it for that. So that's the basic idea around what we do. And we tend to work with some of the very large manufacturers that are out there. I've mentioned car makers. Obviously, that's one of them. But one of the examples I'm going to give today is like Vestas, who's a windmill maker, for example. You've got medical devices, some medical machines that we work with here, hearing aids, anything that's really complex. Big part of our portfolio also is like agricultural equipment, be another place. People who, setting up plants, setting up manufacturing plants, setting up the production lines, some of that. So you can see there's a lot of complex configuration tasks that have to be done in many different discrete manufacturing industries, and that's who we work with.
You mentioned you're based in Denmark right now. Is that where we're?
I'm actually calling you from Copenhagen right now. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well,
but we have offices in the UK, Poland, India, the US. So we're very much a global company at this stage.
I said, oh wow, because I kind of got the time mixed up there. You're actually about probably 6 hours ahead of us. Not, we're recording for our listeners. We're recording this in the morning Eastern time, so it's at least in the afternoon your time. Anyway, one of the things that kind of start with the common theme on this podcast, because it weighs heavily on the minds of a lot of our listeners, is that the looming retirement of experienced employees, and what this kind of expected exodus from the workforce means for manufacturers, especially. And what do you see? Is this something that from your vantage point, at Configit, that you guys are paying attention to, and what kind of impact will that have on your customers?
Well, basically, it's one of the drivers for some of the work that we do. The issue is that manufacturing for many, many years now has it's struggled to find those skilled workers to replace some of that aging workforce that you have. It's hard enough to attract, I think, young workers in some of these industries. Some of the very quite heavy machinery type of industries, not as sexy perhaps as some of the more other industries that are out there. So I think that's been a challenge. But I think you also see that there's been a challenge globally with finding skilled workers. I mean, even with countries that might have moderate unemployment, they still would say that it's very hard to find the workers that they need, right? And partly that's because, particularly in manufacturing, there's been a lot of processes that have been put in place which are document-driven, probably manual to a certain degree, where you really do rely on some of these experienced employees to glue it all together. These guys have built up experience over years about what works, what doesn't work. They know when to do something, when not to do something, who to talk to get the right things done. And of course, when things work, nobody asks why, right? But as that workforce is getting older and you're finding it more and more difficult to find people to replace them, and even when you do find people to replace them, it's hard to get them up to the same level of expertise, because that obviously takes years, right? And, and I guess there might be a certain aspect of some people who may not be so keen to share their knowledge either, right? Because that's what keeps them in their job. So there's a lot of these factors that are playing in. And I think over the last few years, particularly in North America, we've definitely seen how some of the manufacturers there are becoming more and more concerned about this. And it has driven business our way. I mean, where people are like, we need to do something about this. And it really comes down to, how do we automate this process? How do we make sure that where it's not so manual or not so document driven, where mistakes can happen, and we're reliant on these experts to be able to save the day every time. So I think that's some of the major concerns that are there, and they're growing by the day.
And I imagine it poses a particularly unique challenge for manufacturers of complex products, because the more complex the product, the more there could be a patchwork of different processes and things like that at the manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's choices to be made at every step in the process. I mean, most people in their minds, when they're thinking of products or manufacturing, they have this model of a standard product, where Some guy comes up with the design, an engineer makes all the plans for how to make it. It gets sent over to manufacturing, they make it, and then a sales guy sells it, right? And then you service it somewhere down the line. But when you're talking about, customizable products, you can't get around the fact that choices and configurations have to be made all the way along the chain. So if you're like in an engineer to order type of situation, someone comes in and says, I want you to make this for me. Well, there's choices to be made there. You're like, do I start from scratch? Is it something that I already have that I can reuse? What can I do? What can't I do? And that's a lengthy process. A lot of engineering resources needed there, a lot of experienced guys needed in that point there. But if you're making a make to stock model where you're saying like, okay, I'm going to try and handle this complexity in the engineering part and just make variants, right? Someone comes in and they say, right, I want something. And you say, right, that's like something I've made before. So I'm just going to make a variant of that. But what happens there is you end up with, a large number of variants you now have to manage. A lot of them, which are very similar to what's already in the portfolio, just slightly different, and every time you're coming in, you're starting on something new again. And you're like, well, what's the closest variant that gets me to where I want to go, right? So when you're starting to do customizations and things like that, it starts to lead you down. It makes the process a little bit more messy, right? There's a lot of work involved, a lot of engineering work involved, particularly like trying to figure out how to make this and where's my starting point. Can I reuse stuff? Can I not reuse stuff? And that requires experienced employees to figure out. And then you've got to hand carry that through the entire system. How's the manufacturing going to have to be set up in order to do this? If I'm going to deploy it in the field, is there some sort of configuration I need to deploy it? How am I going to sell this, right? Again, if it's a variant, so, okay, do I sell that variant in this market or does it in another market? Is it just for one outlet? So there's choices to be made all along the chain. And then that's where the complexity comes into it, right? And the more complex the product, the more difficult it is, and the more engineering resources and expert resources you need at every step to be able to figure out how to make this run smoothly. Because you have to remember, too, even though it's an ETO or even a make-to-stock product variant, where you're doing something custom for a customer, they're under time pressure because you can't just say, oh, okay, it's going to take 6 months to do this. Usually they're under extreme pressure to get this done quickly, it's inevitable it's going to take time, right? But that problem means then there is no time to kind of think beyond the now, right? The paradox they get into is that they may know that this process is not optimal, but I haven't got time to kind of change it right now because I'm under pressure to start delivering in the next order, right? So I think there's a lot of manufacturers who have that dual problem. They have the dual problem that, yes, I'm very dependent on a few guys, and if anything happens to them, I'm really in trouble. And I know my process isn't perfect, but how do I get started on actually changing that and making it better, right? I haven't got time to stop up and think. So I think there's a double challenge in that one.
And my next question is kind of what you're alluding to there is, so I'm a manufacturer in that situation. What are the steps I can take? How do I begin to address this?
Yeah, so that's where we often, like I said, get people coming to us trying to look at this. And I think what you've got to, the key thing here is that you've got to try and see how you can automate this process as much as possible, right? You want to get away from something that's document driven and dependent on expertise and get into something that's a bit more automatable, right? So that is what our solution is designed to do, in a sense. So in this concrete example, if you're working with, say, customizable products, or you have to meet customization demands for customers. So one of the ways you can do that is to try and migrate to something like a configure to order process. So that instead of building things to spec for the customer, for an engineer to order, you're trying to design your product so that you're configuring instead, that you're prefabricating some modules that you can put together, right? So you're going down a modularization path. Or but even before you get to that point, there's a lot of things you can do, because CTO, or configure to order, I think is something that long term can bring a lot of benefits. But there is probably steps you need to take on the way to that. It's hard to get a complete 100% CTO in many cases. So there is a spectrum of solutions from ETO or make to order to CTO. So you need to kind of look at what steps you can take along the way. So I think that one of the first steps there is to say, right, let's try and capture the experience of some of these employees as rules, right? So you can build product models of your model, of your system, of your process, and basically capture some of those rules, just on how different things can be combined. And so in our world, it's about product configurations. So which features can go with which features, and which features are not allowed, or what are the constraints between them. You can capture all that in a model, and that's exactly what we do with this configuration lifecycle management approach that we use. So basically, if you take your experienced employee, he will know what works, what doesn't work, what you can combine, what you can't combine. As you go further downstream, you'll have marketing and sales guys who'll know, I can sell that in this market, but not in that market. And these are all rules that you can capture in the product model. So not just engineering technical rules, but also operational rules, logistic rules, market rules, sort of the market availability rules, you want to call it that, and even then the service chain as well. So I think that's a good start, is to say, let's try and see if we can capture the experience of these guys in these models, and then make sure that model is something that is shared and common to everyone. So it's not just for engineering or manufacturing, but you're actually making it accessible to everybody, where everyone can contribute from their experience into this.
So just so I'm clear, there's information obviously beyond engineering, like you mentioned, but information on like particular, like if you're entering a new market or existing markets and things like that's kind of built in.
Yeah. So when I talk about market availability, there is that there'll be certain, let's say, like if you're building a car, there'll be a steering wheel, right, or a steering wheel shaft, or something like that. I mean, sometimes it's on the right and sometimes it's on the left, right?
Yeah.
Which one you choose depends on which market you're selling into. So that's a very simple example, but you have that all the time. I mean, the sense of, or you're building bundles or packages that for specific markets or what have you. So in the sales and marketing part, and this is often overlooked when we talk about this, because we often think about the engineering side of things, but on the sales and marketing side, there's a lot of choices that are made there as well about what is offered in different markets. And that's often captured in other systems. So usually when we're working with customers, we find that there's multiple systems involved where you're going to have rules and other data that's in different formats that we have to bring together. And that's part of our expertise, is that we're very good at integrating into PLM, ERP, and CPQ and CRM systems to be able to extract that data into one common model, but also syncing back again. So we don't talk about being a single source of truth. We talk about being a shared source of truth, because we don't need to actually be the master of the data. We just need to be able to synchronize with it. So when we put solutions together, it's just basically about synchronizing that data end to end, rather than being the owner. And I think there's probably a bit too much focus on that, and that leads to a lot of conflicts between different departments. So engineers can continue to use a PLM system and to work in their processes as just as much as the sales and marketing and manufacturing guys can. But we're just extracting all that information and making it easier to consume. So we can consolidate it, we can coordinate it, we can align it, we can help you to validate it, so you can identify if there's misalignments between different parts of the information, if there's gaps and other things. But it starts to give you control over this configurable data. Because when you start moving into customizable products, I mean, what you're finding is you're no longer selling products anymore. You're selling product configurations. So the granularity is somewhere else. So, and trying to manage that then also after sales becomes a big issue. So you need some way of being able to capture all of that, not only the design part, but also capturing those configurations once they've been made as well, which is also part of our solution. So you can actually manage that all the way through the life cycle of the product. So that's why we call it a configuration lifecycle management approach, because it's not just the engineering design part of what you're trying to get out the door, like the new product development process, but it's also managing the after sales and the full life cycle of the portfolio after that, with all the traceability and end-to-end insight that you need to be able to do that. So that's kind of the full spectrum of what we're doing.
And configuration lifecycle management, also known by its acronym CLM. I mean, that's really like you had mentioned. It's the overarch. It's a fairly newer concept, right? I mean, new in the sense that it's like a decade or two.
Well, I'd say we actually it's 2025 now. So it's 10 years old today, right? I think actually it was August in 2015, if I remember correctly, or whatever. But yeah, we're going to be 10 years old this year, and it was a concept that was defined together with our customers. We have CLM summits that we have every year, where we bring our customers together and other people who are interested. It's an online event now that we do every year, and basically where they share their cases and where they've been able to use this approach to be able to solve some of their problems of this, and where we can show some insight into what we're working on. Well, out of that, there became this CLM declaration, as it was called, where we kind of defined what CLM was. And it's basically an approach to solving these issues where you begin to realize that there's specific data that you need to bring together in order to be able to manage these configurable products. And then you need to manage that data all the way through. So any changes, then you're keeping it up to date with the latest information from the engineering side, from the sales side, and then managing that throughout the life cycle of the actual product model, but also the configurations that get made. So like last year, we introduced the concept of a digital configuration thread. So a lot of our customers now and a lot of other IT vendors in this space are looking at digital threads and digital twins. So our role in that is actually providing the digital configuration thread, which allows you to trace back how has the configuration of the product changed over time. We have one particular customer who has some very big machines that get deployed and can be there for decades, and then may need to be updated after a certain number of years. And one of the challenges they had was actually figuring out, well, what was it exactly that we configured for that customer way back when? So we've made it a lot easier for them to be able to just quickly look up what was the configuration, and then is it still valid, and what are the minimum number of changes I have to make it valid, right? So this is some of the things that you can do. So you can save weeks of man hours doing that, and again, you don't need to have expert resources out there doing it. So that's kind of like some of the things that you can do with a CLM approach.
And we talked about how the CLM approach can help with obviously the looming the looming worker shortage and ongoing skills gap. How can it help in maybe recruiting and onboarding skilled employees?
Yeah, so I mean, on the one side, you're trying to capture all that information from those experts there, so you're minimizing your risk if anything happens to those guys, right? And I think that's the hard conversation that has to be had there, is that, if you get hit by a bus, I mean, we're in deep trouble here, so we can't run that risk. So then you can capture that experience, as I said, as rules, and that'll help you. You may not be able to capture all of their experience, but you'll be able to capture quite a bit of it, I think. So that's one way of alleviating that pressure. But of course, once you've automated a process like that and you have this model which captures all this information, the new hire that you bring in, the bar for him to get up to speed is much, much lower now. Like, he doesn't have to accumulate those years of experience and the hard knocks that informed the expert of before. He can pretty much rely on that model there and build up his experience working with that and the automated process instead. So now it actually helps you in your hiring process, in that the bar that you need, the expertise you need for the guy coming in is not as high. You have potential to actually train that guy to be able to do the job and get him being productive a lot quicker. And I think that's the same for any automation of processes. The more you automate, the more you use digital solutions to be able to automate your processes, the less resources you need to be able to make it work, but also the less demands you have on each of those resources then for the expertise they need to be able to achieve. So I think it works in both ways.
Makes sense when you have everything at your fingertips versus disparate patchwork of processes and information. Do you kind of bringing all of this together, do you have some maybe example or two of customers who faced some of the challenges that we've talked about and were able to use CLM or have, achieve a favorable outcome?
Yeah, there's quite a few. And if you go to our website, you'll probably see a lot of customer cases for that from different industries. The one that kind of jumps to mind here for specifically this issue is a customer called Vestas that you might have heard of. They're a windmill provider, so they're, windmill energy. So they build windmill turbines, wind turbines, but they also deploy wind turbine farms. So this is so you have multiple wind turbines that are deployed at sea or on land, and there's a bunch of other equipment that you need to have with that, like generators and other things, and that has to be scaled, of course, according to the wind farms. And when you deploy these wind turbines and the wind farms, there's a lot of configuration options that you have to set. I believe it was something like 60,000 different configuration options that you have to set in the turbine and the farm in order to make it work. And so it's quite complicated. And when Vestas came to us, the concern they had was that they were actually quite dependent on a few experienced employees who knew how to set these 60,000 different options, right? And they said, that's all fine, but yeah, what happens if one of them gets hurt? And I mean, we're talking about wind turbines out in the North Sea and stuff like that. The chances of that happening are not remote. So they were like, okay, well, we want to de-risk this. And it could potentially also accelerate our time to market and our delivery times, etc. So what can we do? So we worked together with them, and we used a CLM approach to create what they called a configuration workbench. So they did exactly this. They captured all of the experience that these employees had, put it into a model with rules, and that allowed them then to be able to quickly configure, because there was dependencies between these configurations, obviously. So when you choose one thing, it obviously affects another configuration option. So they were able to make this a much more efficient process to be able to configure these, and you didn't need to have as much expertise as you did in the past. So that sped up the actual deployment process and getting these things out there. But then they hooked that back into their engineering system, which was PDC Windchill, I believe. And so we integrated with that, and basically we could keep that workbench up to date with the latest changes in designs and what have you. And what it ended up doing was helping them actually to get new features out into the market quicker, right? Because it was more automated now, the whole process of exposing this in the tools that they needed for this. And the final step that they did then was to say, well, we're using this internally to be able to configure things for deployment, but we could also use this together with our sales customers. So they actually made a sales configuration tool as well, which hooked back into the workbench, so that you could actually sit down with customers and actually design these wind farms together with them. So when they were looking at, I need something that can give me these number of gigawatts and what have you, you could put it together and you could take a look at it, and they could try and demo it out with them, So they were very pleased with that. And there is a good coverage of this case on our website with a nice video as well that goes through it from Vestas that describes this. But I mean, in raw numbers, I mean, what they achieved was, obviously faster introduction of new products into the market. That was one of the benefits that they got out of this. And also the faster deployment, obviously, which was the original intention. But then they were able to do 100% BOM validation too, which is a challenge for a lot of companies. So by using this approach, they were able to make sure their BOMs were all complete and there was no gaps and no duplicates, etc. They could actually support more product variants this way, right? Because now the entire system is automated. So it was in general, there was improved efficiency from the entire solution because we just completely automated an entire process that was very manual before. And then when it came to the sales configuration part, they actually reduced their quotation times from 60 minutes down to 5 minutes with this. So, so there's a number of different benefits for that. And this is not uncommon from the kind of customers that we see. I think a lot of manufacturers are probably unaware of that if they're experiencing some issues in their sales configuration process or time to market, quotation times, whatever, they might often be looking in the wrong places to find out where is the issue. If you've got highly complex highly complex products, it probably is a configuration problem that you have because they're very complicated. So if you're seeing these delays or errors, misalignments, delivering the wrong products, etc., one place you should look is in how you're doing your configurations. And by automating that process, you can get a lot of these benefits. So we typically see, we've seen customers have 92% reduction in time to market with this stuff. Obviously, we can guarantee 0 errors during the configuration process because everything's aligned and, because we brought into one place, we're able to validate it. We also, of course, part of our technology is the ability to be able to pre-compile all of the potential configurations in what we call a solution space. So the way our solution works is that when you have your model defining all the rules and features, so there could be millions of potential configurations that you could make from that. We can pre-compile all that, generate all those configurations, save it in a file, and these will, of course, be valid configurations because we're using the rules there to do it. So it's only valid configurations. And we can compact that into a small file, maybe a few megabytes size, and that can be used then for lookup during a configuration process. So instead of having these kind of runtime algorithms, which are trying to take away choices every time you make a choice and stuff like that, there's a lot of configuration solutions that work like that, like CPQs. In our process here, it's just simply a lookup in the file. If that configuration you're making is in the file, it's valid. If it's not, it's not. So you tend to get a much better performance. So you see reductions in, like, there's no latency in the user experience. There's no delays. You can generate quotations instantaneously. So there's a lot of benefits in moving in this direction. So so we have a short time to speak today. There's a lot of things that I could talk about, but I think this maybe would whet the appetite of some people to kind of look and explore this a bit more. So head over to configit.com and you can see a lot of the cases that I've been talking about and some more, and potentially this could be a solution for some of the problems you might be experiencing.
All right. Well, Daniel, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us for an interesting conversation on all this. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for the opportunity, David. It's great talking to you.
And then to learn more about the latest manufacturing trends and to hear more podcasts, don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast feed. And to stay up to date about what's happening in manufacturing today and hear more podcasts, visit us at advancedmanufacturing.org.